Imagine being in a mall just going about your day when suddenly you're accused of something you didn't do. That's exactly what happened to Mr. Charles Sanders, an elderly man who was harassed by security officers. Little did they know, his daughter was about to arrive, and what happened next left everyone stunned. It was a quiet afternoon at Maplewood Mall, the kind of day when everything seemed to move at a slower, more relaxed pace. Mr. Charles Sanders, a 75-year-old retired teacher, was spending his afternoon running a few errands. His silver-grey hair and neatly trimmed beard gave him a dignified appearance. Dressed in a light cardigan and slacks, he walked with the assistance of a sturdy wooden cane, his gait slow but steady. Charles had always been independent, preferring to do his shopping alone, even if it took a little longer these days. The mall was lively, but not overly crowded. Families strolled through the wide corridors, and the occasional hum of conversation blended with the distant melody of soft background music. Charles had just finished purchasing a few essentials: a loaf of whole-grain bread, a carton of milk, fresh produce, and a tin of his favorite Earl Grey tea. The shopping bag, light enough for him to carry comfortably, hung loosely in his hand. He took his time moving toward the exit, pausing briefly to admire a colorful display in the bookstore window. Just as he approached the sliding glass doors leading to the parking lot, 2 security officers stepped in front of him, blocking his path. They were both large men, their dark uniforms crisp and intimidating. Their faces carried an expression of suspicion and authority, their body language suggesting they were ready for confrontation. "Sir, we need to speak with you," one of the officers said curtly, his voice low and demanding. Charles stopped, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely, gripping his cane a little tighter. "We've had reports of shoplifting," the second officer added, his tone sharp and accusatory. "We need to check your belongings." Charles blinked, the accusation taking him by surprise. "Shoplifting?" he repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I've done no such thing. Everything in my bag is paid for." His heart began to beat faster as he reached into his pocket with a trembling hand, retrieving the neatly folded receipt. "Here," he said, holding it out toward them. "You can see for yourself." The first officer glanced at the receipt but made no effort to take it. Instead, he exchanged a look with his partner. "We'll need you to come with us," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Charles felt his stomach drop. "But why? I've shown you my receipt. I haven't stolen anything." His voice remained calm, but there was a hint of desperation as he tried to reason with them. "I'm just an old man doing my shopping." The officers weren't interested in his explanations. One of them stepped forward and reached for Charles's arm. "We're not discussing this here," he said firmly. "You're coming with us." The sudden grip on his arm startled Charles, and he instinctively tried to pull away. His cane wobbled under the shift in balance, and he nearly stumbled. "Let me go," he protested, his voice rising slightly. "You're making a mistake." The officer's grip only tightened. "Stop resisting," he said, his tone cold and unyielding. Charles's mind raced. He had never been in trouble with the law, never had so much as a parking ticket. The humiliation of being manhandled in public was overwhelming. Around him, passers-by had begun to stop and stare. Some whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. But no one stepped forward to help. As the officers began dragging him toward the security office, Charles's shopping bag slipped from his hand, spilling its contents onto the floor. His phone tumbled out and landed with a soft clatter. Desperation surged within him. He had to call for help. With shaky hands, he bent down and grabbed the phone, managing to unlock it despite the officers pulling him forward. He tapped the contact labeled Sophia. His daughter always told him to call her if he needed anything. This was one of those moments. The phone rang once, then twice, before a familiar voice answered. "Dad, what's wrong?" Sophia's voice was warm but instantly concerned. "Sophia," Charles whispered, his voice trembling. "I need you. I'm at the mall. The security." His words faltered as one of the officers noticed the call and tried to snatch the phone away. Sophia heard enough. "I'm on my way, Dad," she said firmly. "Don't worry." Charles clung to that reassurance as the officers dragged him into the small, dimly lit security office. They pushed him into a chair, his cane leaning against the wall nearby. He sat there, his chest heaving, his mind racing with disbelief and indignation. Minutes later, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. The door burst open, and in walked Sophia Sanders, her presence commanding the room. At 32 years old, Sophia was an attorney with a reputation for being sharp, fearless, and unrelenting. Her tailored suit and confident stride exuded authority, and her dark eyes blazed with determination. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She immediately spotted her father, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. "Dad, are you okay?" Charles nodded weakly, relief washing over him at the sight of his daughter. "I'm fine, Sophia," he said quietly. "But these men," he gestured toward the officers, "they've accused me of stealing." Sophia's gaze snapped to the two officers, who were momentarily caught off guard by her sudden arrival. "Accused him of stealing," she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "On what grounds?" The first officer cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "We received a report of suspicious behavior," he said. "We were following protocol." "Protocol?" Sophia shot back, her tone icy. "Did your protocol include ignoring his receipt when he tried to show it to you, or physically manhandling a 75-year-old man without cause?" The officer shifted uncomfortably but stood his ground. "He was resisting," he said defensively. Sophia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Resisting?" she echoed. "You mean he didn't comply when you unlawfully detained him without evidence? Let me make this clear. You've just assaulted an innocent man and violated his rights. My father is not leaving this room until you've apologized and addressed this properly." The second officer, less confident than his partner, stammered. "We didn't know he—" "You didn't know what?" Sophia interrupted sharply. "That he's an elderly man who deserves to be treated with dignity. That he's a retired teacher who spent decades contributing to this community. Or were you too busy playing mall cop to use common sense?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they were out of their depth. Sophia wasn't done. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. "I'm documenting everything," she said. "Names, badge numbers, and every detail of this incident. And believe me, this will not go unnoticed." Her words carried a weight that left no room for argument. The officers mumbled weak apologies, their earlier bravado completely deflated. One of them retrieved Charles's shopping bag and carefully placed it in front of him, the spilled items neatly repacked. Charles watched the scene unfold, his initial fear replaced by a deep sense of pride. His daughter had taken control of the situation with unwavering confidence, turning the tables on the very men who had humiliated him. As the officers continued to stammer their apologies, Sophia turned to her father. "Let's go, Dad," she said softly, her tone gentle now. She helped him to his feet, handing him his cane and steadying him as they left the office. The walk through the mall was quieter this time. The crowd that had gathered earlier had mostly dispersed, though a few onlookers remained, their faces filled with curiosity and sympathy. Sophia kept her arm around her father's shoulders, her presence a shield against the world. Once they were outside, Charles took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. "Thank you, Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Sophia squeezed his hand. "You don't have to face things like this alone, Dad," she said. "You have me. Always." As they drove home, the weight of the ordeal began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of justice. Charles knew the matter wasn't over. Sophia had already promised to file a formal complaint, ensuring the officers would be held accountable. But for now, he felt safe, surrounded by the love and support of his daughter. And while the experience had shaken him, it also reminded him of the strength of the bond they shared, a bond that could weather even the darkest moments.